Hello. On September 30, 2022, Vladimir Putin annexes the eastern region of the Ukraine. I predicted exactly that this would happen at this time 5 months ago. I'm going to show you how I made the prediction and what some of the astrological dynamics behind the prediction are. And I'm making this video on September 30, the day that Vladimir Putin is annexing the eastern region of the Ukraine. And of course, this is under huge dispute. Many countries are saying that it is illegal and it amounts to a violent takeover. But in any case, I'm not here to debate that issue. I want to show you the dynamics of what's going on and the astrology behind this and how I had predicted that this would happen 5 months ago. So last night, on the evening of September 29th, Putin signed a decree that he would annex the regions on the following day, September 30th. And on September 30th, between 3 and 4 p.m. in Moscow, was the official signing of the annexation. So there's a big ceremony on September 30, 2022, and the signing, and the time set for it was 3 p.m. I checked the news at 4 p.m. Moscow time, and he had already signed it. So somewhere between 3 and 4 p.m., he signed the declaration as was intended. Now, on the next slide, I'm going to show you the prediction that I made. And by the way, if you want to go back to the earlier video in which I made the prediction, I will put in the description of this video a link to it. And I also have the address here, but you can just read the description of the YouTube video and you'll see the link to it if you want to go back and look at it. You don't need to, but if you're curious and interested, you can do that. Now, here is the slide from the video that I made way back in April, over 5 months ago, in which I predicted that Putin would attempt to annex the eastern region of the Ukraine. That's, perhaps not very astounding. We could anticipate that that could happen. But I predicted when it would happen and that he would get to the point of being able to do that. And I'll read from this slide. Again, I've just taken the slide that I made in April, and I show this graph. Well, let me talk about the graph first. What the graph shows is the ups and downs that I anticipate for Putin's invasion of Russia. And you see I've got a little red circle there, and a note that Putin invades Ukraine on February 24th, 2022. So on the down slope of this peak, right near this peak, is when he invades. And the astrological theory is that whatever was happening at this time that caused this graph to go up, when that repeats, in other words, when the planets align in a way that resonates with how the planets were aligned when the war began, then it triggers that the invasion, just like a birth chart, would get triggered. So a resonance at the outset of this war, at the time of the invasion, when the planets resonate with it, and we have a very clear formula that determines when it resonates, and we can graph it, which we've done in the Sirius Astrology software, and we see a huge resonance in September and October. This big, wide area. And so I predicted back in April, I made the video in April when everything looked pretty low, and I said, in September and October, Putin is going to get fired up. And to read from the slide that I made back in April, what I said is, I decided to produce the graph for another year into the future. This graph shows the trends in anti-Western feelings from July 1st, 2021 to July 1st, 2023. So this is a 2-year graph from mid-2021 to mid-2023. When these anti-Western feelings that were strong when Putin invaded Ukraine repeat with the same kind of anti-Western feeling, the same exact kind of vibrations, you might say celestial vibrations, then it triggers the energy, the motivation for the war. And this anti-Western feelings tend to be high in September and October and early in November, and then again in February and early March. And let me read this other sentence. The graph shows for me what is a big surprise. So I saw this graph and I just said, wow, what's happening in September and October? And my conclusion is that I've put it in yellow highlight and bold here. Russia is likely to claim parts of eastern Ukraine as part of Russia in September and October and reassert its position in late February and early March 2023. That's this peak over here. We'll see if that comes true. But the timing of this is amazingly accurate. This is exactly what happened. So if you go back to the beginning of September 2022, that's when Putin began a political process of seeing if he can get support from China and India to form a coalition. What happened is that India and China remained fairly neutral, but Putin moves forward anyway with his plan to move into the Ukraine. And so the timing matches the forecast extremely well. As soon as September comes, Putin starts his strong planning for the takeover. And retired U.S. four-star General David Petraeus said that, quote, Putin is desperate and in an irreversible situation. So what a lot of political commentators are saying here in the United States is that, oh, well, Putin is on this crazy war. He's desperate now. And this is just, his last attempt to do something. That may be true. Could very well be true. But if he's desperate and he's at his wit's end trying to figure out what to do, and this isn't working out as he anticipated, there are other possible strategies. And Putin would be annexing eastern Ukraine now if he was winning the war. So looking at it astrologically, regardless of whether he's winning or losing, this is the time when his momentum builds and he takes strong action, predicted over 5 months ago. Now, let me say one more thing about this forecast, and then I'm going to show you exactly what the forecast is and I'll explain some more details about what's going on. The forecast was based on an astrological analysis, as I said, of the moment that the invasion of the Ukraine started. We don't have a birth time for Putin. I did not do his chart. Without a birth time, I really cannot do anything. So all I'm looking at is the time that the war began. Some astrologers said, you can't make a forecast just based on that. Well, I did, and it proved to be accurate. It's a little bit like when a scientist looks at a tiny fragment of a bone and determines what the animal is. So, you know those situations where they find a little piece of a bone and try to put together, or maybe it's even like a dinosaur bone or something, and they don't have the full skeleton, and then from that, the scientists can attempt to recreate what this whole animal is. That's very analogous to what I've done. I've only got a tiny bit of information. So I'm not expecting my forecast to be extremely accurate with just this one little bit of information. I did not look at the chart of Putin. I wasn't able to, or other people involved. Just from that one little thing, I made the prediction and proved to be true. The point is, the astrology really works. When you look at the whole context of what's going on with this forecast, it's really amazing. And also consider that the forecast was a surprise to me. I had no other basis for expecting Putin to attempt to annex eastern Ukraine based on some kind of logic or intuition to support it. The only intuition or logic that seemed reasonable is that, well, as of April, he wasn't doing very well in the war. Maybe he'll just settle for the eastern region. That's kind of common sense, nothing extraordinary about that, no big deal to make that forecast. But to predict the exact timing of it, that's amazing, especially when I had no particular reason to think that would be important, other than the astrology said so. So it's a purely astrological prediction. And this is how the prediction was made. I showed this information in the previous videos, but to review it again, this is the forecast. This is the formula that we put into the Sirius Astrology software. and it's extraordinarily simple. What I saw at the time of the invasion of the Ukraine is a 7 vibration configuration. This often happens during events like this. And so I made a formula of Sun, Mars, Saturn, or Pluto. Those are pretty rough, heavy-duty planets to an astrologer. This would make sense. Sun, Mars, Saturn, or Pluto in aspect to Neptune. Now, that Neptune is involved in all of these planetary configurations is surprising to astrologers, but that's what I noticed was happening when the war began. And we have a very data-driven procedure. And so when Sun, Mars, Saturn, or Pluto are in 7 times 2, 7 times 3, or 7 times 4 vibration to Neptune, that is going to increase the resonance with the motivation that was happening when the war began. And we put that into the software and it makes the graph, and then we just see what it says. I just looked at the graph and it said, oh, September, October. And there's the list of all of these configurations. What's stunning and even shocking about this is that these are things in astrology that almost no astrologers look at, and they would never interpret it this way. So these are part of the breakthroughs that we've made through this evidence-based approach to astrology, this very rigorous, data-driven approach with a lot of breakthroughs in theory. So we come up with the formula, we can put it in the software, and we make the prediction. Now let's zoom in to see a little bit more about what's happening on September 30, 2022, when Putin claims that the eastern region of the Ukraine is now part of Russia. Now, again, a large part of the world says this is illegal. This is really a violent takeover. This is not proper. Other people say it's okay. I'm not going to get into that aspect of it. I'm going to just show you how I made the prediction, what the forces at work are. So here I've zoomed in and I'm just showing from mid-August to mid-November, from about 2 weeks before this surge in the war effort by Putin and his attempt to turn it around and to get the upper hand, which starts in early September, and I'm predicting it will end in early November. So it's basically September and October that we see this peak. And this little peak here, where I put the red circle, that's September 29th at 12 noon, which is 15 hours or 3 p.m. in Moscow. So each one of these things is graphed for 3 p.m. Moscow time. And it just goes through the formula, adds it up, and draws the graph. So on September 29th, Putin issues a decree. He issues a decree on the 29th saying that he's going to annex these 4 provinces, these eastern region of the Ukraine, the following day, September 30th. So when he makes that decree is during this little peak. Very interesting. I mean, if he made it when it was relatively low during this period, well, that doesn't give us as much confidence that we've really pinpointed the astrology behind what's going on. But the fact it happens at this highest peak between the early and latter part of this time period is exactly when he makes the decree, and the following day, September 30th, is when he signs. There's this big ceremony, very, formal and rich environment with the big signing that this eastern part of Ukraine is now part of Russia, is happening right during that peak, during the resonance, when the attention and motivation and force is supporting him to do this. Now, this is all based on what we call 7 vibration, or you can call it 7th harmonic. In Vedic astrology, it's called Saptamsa. That the Saptamsa chart is involved in this invasion is surprising to Vedic astrologers, most people who do harmonic astrology, but this is what we've discovered and explained in great detail. I've made 600 YouTube videos. We have classes, we have books, there are people teaching. So a lot of information about this that supports why 7 vibration is involved. And we noticed it at the beginning of the invasion into the Ukraine. And when we look at that time of September 30th at 15 hours, that's within less than 1 hour of when Vladimir Putin officially signs the papers. He signs it. It's now official that he's saying, you are now part of Russia. Probably most of the rest of the world does not agree. Some of the world is neutral about it. Very few people appear to be supporting him in this. But he signs it and he says, you're now part of Russia. When this happens, that he signs it, the 7 vibration is through the roof. It's boom, extremely, extremely strong. This is so amazing that this vibrational astrology has uncovered these celestial frequencies that are going on through the power of modern technology and information services and some creative thinking and intensely hard work. This has become clear. So if you're a student of vibrational astrology or you're a professional vibrational astrologer, you will look at this chart and you'll go, oh my God, this is amazing. Here's the 7 vibration chart. Let me review a little bit of what's going on here. In the 7 vibration chart, Saturn at 13 Gemini is trine Neptune at 15 Aquarius. Now, if you're new to this, you'll say, wait a minute, Saturn's not in Gemini, Neptune's not in Aquarius. Well, this is not the normal chart. It's called a vibrational chart or harmonic chart. So don't worry about where it comes from right now if this is new to you. But there is a thing called a vibrational chart, and in this chart, Saturn is trine Neptune. Saturn and Neptune stay trine in the 7 vibration chart for a very long time, much longer than normally would happen. It stays in orb for 2 months, which is extremely unusual because these vibrational charts change much faster than the regular chart. But they happen to just stay within orb the way Saturn is retrograding and then turns direct and everything, just stays within orb for a long time, and that's what creates that peak. Now, when the faster moving planets move into a resonance with the Saturn-Neptune, then it becomes as particularly strong. And that's what happens with that little peak that we saw. But the formula that I use, let's go back and to look at that formula back here. This is a very simplified formula. There's much more going on than this. I just made a very simple formula just to capture an overall effect without getting too refined about it. When we go and we look at the details that are involved, there's much more than these 3 things listed at the bottom. These are the 3 astrological configurations that make the graph. There's the Saturn trine Neptune, the middle one, giving about 5 points, about 5.5 points. Mars trine Neptune and Sun trine not trine. In the 7 vibration, Saturn is trine Neptune. 7 times 3 is 21. Mars is trine Neptune. That's also 21. And Sun is square Neptune. You see that in the chart. There's the Saturn trine Neptune. There's the Mars trine Neptune. And over here is the Sun at 21 Scorpio square Neptune. Actually, by the 30th, it's out of orb, 6 degrees. On the previous day, the Sun moves 7 degrees in 1 day. So in the 7 vibration chart, on the 29th, when that peaked, it peaked because the Sun would have been back at, 21 minus 7, 14 degrees. It was exactly squaring Neptune when Putin gave the decree. Okay, if you got lost with all those planets and numbers, all I'm saying is that these faster moving planets like Sun and Mars are moving into aspects and other kinds of configurations with the Saturn-Neptune on the 29th when he makes the decree, and still in resonance on the 30th. In fact, on the 30th, during the signing, there's a huge super symmetry midpoint configuration. And this is something I did not include in the formula because I just wanted a general formula just to see if anything would work at all. But this is exactly the kind of thing we expect using vibrational astrology. It's extraordinary. What's happening is that these big, fat purple lines are showing the symmetry patterns when a planet is in between two others. And the planets we're interested in are Mars, Saturn, and Neptune. Those are three key planets that we saw at the time of the invasion. So all of these symmetry patterns that are shown here, highlighted in yellow, we call them midpoint structures. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them. That's a lot that are going on. 5 of these symmetry patterns, all involving Mars, Saturn, Neptune, and making what we call a supersymmetry configuration. So, for example, Neptune is in between Sun and Saturn. It's opposition to Sun-Saturn midpoint. If you take the midpoint of the Mars and Neptune, did I say that right? Let me say it again. Neptune is the midpoint of Mars and Saturn. You see the red or purple arrow coming from Saturn to Neptune and one coming from Sun to Neptune to show that Neptune is in between, same distance. It's opposition, the midpoint of Mars and Saturn. Then you take one leg of this. You take the Mars-Neptune and you see that it's involved with important planetary configurations as well. And also, if you throw in the Sun, then you get the moon Pluto is directly in between the Neptune and Sun. And moon and Pluto are conjunct. And what else do we have? The moon Pluto and the Sun, you take those two and Saturn's in between those. So the big supersymmetry pattern is with Saturn and Neptune, not so much with Mars. Saturn and Neptune are the two involved in the big supersymmetry configuration, because what happens is you take the Sun and Neptune, and moon Pluto is in between that. Moon and Pluto are in between the Sun and Neptune, and then you take this leg of it, this between the Sun and the moon Pluto, and Saturn's in between those. So there's a huge Sun, Moon, Saturn, Neptune, Pluto at the exact timing of the signing. And the moon moves extremely fast in these 7 vibration, and it's within 1 degree of Pluto from 1458 to 1528. Notice from 2:58 p.m. to 3:28 p.m. It's there for a half hour. So if the signing was after 3 p.m. and closer to 3:30 p.m., the conjunction is there. It was exact at about 3:13 p.m. And between 2:58 p.m. and 3:28 p.m., it's within a degree. If you give it another half hour, that would put us all the way to 4 o'clock. It's within 2 degrees. So the moon is there. And I bet the signing was probably by 3:30 p.m. or 3:45, when this moon Pluto is very tight, squeezed between the Sun and Neptune, and Saturn squeezed between the Sun and the moon Pluto. This moon Pluto in 7 vibration being part of this huge symmetry pattern, with the moon adding right within about an hour or two of the time of the signing. For that hour or two, the moon gets critically involved, adds a lot of deep emotion, a lot of feelings of ancient bad feelings, deeply rooted feelings of oppression and things like this. So this is a very deep emotional reaction. That may seem obvious, but when you see it astrologically and you see how powerful and clear these configurations are, it tells us that this isn't going away. Even if Putin loses the war and those regions go back to the Ukraine, which is very possible, these deeply ingrained problems are not going away. They're endemic. They've been sustained for a long time. They keep repeating over and over again, and we keep encountering these same international problems over and over again. And I predict that we will continue, so that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, regardless of what happens, these kind of themes of the tension, the struggles, the misunderstandings between countries like Russia and the Western countries are likely to continue. It's not as simple as just putting in a new leader, like some kind of regime change, which some American leaders talk about periodically, not as simple as, oh, we're going to just change the culture a little bit and pull in some people. That's exactly what's causing the problems. Okay, so it's exactly one of the things causing problems. So my point is, we can see the dynamics, we understand what's going on looking at it astrologically. And by the way, we're going to see if the forecast for October is correct. This indicates that the tensions and the battles are going to be strong through October, and it gets resolved fairly quickly by November. And Russia will reassert its strength in early March, but otherwise Ukraine gains the upper hand. I have a graph of Western strength in one of the previous videos, and it shows the Western support increasing in November and December. So by December, I expect things will be pretty much resolved and things will be stabilized in the Ukraine. I don't know if the eastern region of Ukraine will go back to the Ukraine or not, but things will stabilize and resolve themselves for the most part. So 2 final points. 1, my prediction made 5 months ago is very accurate, but it's not perfect. It's not a perfect forecast. It's kind of stunningly accurate, but not perfect, because in those forecasts, I anticipated that the war would swing in Putin's favor as he applied more pressure in the war during September and October. But Putin never got the upper hand in the war. So saying that he would get the upper hand and he would start winning in September, October, which is what I said, appears to not be true. He's won a little bit of ground in at least being able to claim that he now has made eastern Ukraine part of Russia, and he's had this referendum to support it and so on. But he still doesn't have the upper hand. He doesn't have the support of the great majority of the people even in his own country, and the rest of the world is looking at this as a hostile takeover with no legal support or moral backing to it. So Putin has never gotten the upper hand in the war. But on a relative scale, this is one of the stronger times for Putin. He's not been doing very well with this war. And on a relative scale, this is one of the higher points over the last several months especially. Actually through the whole war for him. He's got something going for him. Even if it seems very little, it's relatively high point for him that he's at least claimed it, even if it's temporary. So he's made some tangible progress really for the first time, even if it does not last past October. He's not going to lose it immediately, according to my forecast. Through October, he's going to maintain some control over it. By November, he might lose it. He'll either lose it or they'll come to a negotiated agreement of some kind. So support from the Russian people is weaker than I expected. So again, my forecast isn't perfect. I thought Putin would get the upper hand in September. He doesn't have the upper hand. People are leaving the country. He's made some progress. So on a relative scale, it's correct. In absolute terms, specifically what I said is not completely correct in that he never got the upper hand. So as I have in parentheses at the end, I'm not an expert in political matters. So on a relative scale, it's accurate. The detail is shockingly accurate. I predicted he would annex the eastern region of Ukraine between September and October, and that's exactly what he's done. And I was correct that there has been some revival of, you might say, traditional values, or sometimes even reactionary, some people call them reactionary values. Georgia Maloney became prime minister in the last few weeks during this time period, and she's extremely conservative. So the strength of the conservative movement, I think, right now is a little bit stronger than the media in America is making it out to be. They're making Putin out to be a wild lunatic who has no support, and all the young men don't want to be drafted into his war, and they're all leaving, and it's just a big fiasco, and he's in this desperate last attempt, and they're making him look like a clown in a lot of the news. It's really not that much of a clown and not that much of lack of support. There is support. There is a conservative movement. There are people like Georgia Maloney who are getting elected. And India and China did not turn against Russia. They didn't give strong support. They made a few little comments, but it's not like the whole world is turned against him. So that conservative movement is strong, and it will get weaker towards the end of the year in November and December. And I predict the war will begin to come to a closing in November. And there will be a little resurgence of something in March. I'm not sure if it's going to be the Ukraine or something similar, but more disputes arising again in March and people like Putin taking more aggressive action. Second and last point I want to make is this quote from BBC.com where Vladimir Putin says, I've captured this screen of the website. He said, I'll just read from the website. He says, Russian President Vladimir Putin has ordered a partial mobilization to reinforce his troops in Ukraine after major combat setbacks this month. In an address to the nation, he said Russia was directly threatened with disintegration by the Western powers backing the Kiev government. Let me repeat that. Putin said that he believes that Russia was directly threatened with disintegration by the Western powers backing the Kiev government. This perhaps sounds delusional or paranoid to the West, like the West is threatening the Russian government and all these powers like the United States and England that are supporting the Ukraine and their government in the capital of Kiev, that they're disintegrating Russia. They're chopping up Russia. That this really is part of the Russian world, even though Ukraine is not, a part of Russia. He feels like culturally or in a soul sense, they are part of Russia, and the West is out to get us. So it sounds paranoid or delusional to many people in the West. What a lot of people are not appreciating is that this is what he really believes. So if you want to defeat your enemy, it helps to know who the enemy is and to be able to get inside the head of the enemy. Whether it's delusional, whether you agree with it or not, whatever it is, if you don't understand the enemy, it puts you at a disadvantage. And I would say I'm not hearing hardly anything from the United States leadership or our allies that addresses some of the real issues of what's going on. Maybe they know it and they don't want to talk about it, but I think it's worse than that. I think they don't realize what's going on, that he's telling you exactly the truth. He thinks the Western world is trying to take over his culture and his world. That's what he perceives. And he thinks he's righteous in what he's doing, even if it seems cruel, brutal, inhumane, whatever your view is. I'm not going to debate that. Everybody has their own views. I have my views. It's not important for this video. I'm here to talk about what is actually going on. And what's happening is that Putin thinks he's trying to preserve his ancient culture that he loves so much against invasion. Believe it or not, that's what's actually really going on. How do I know this? Because we can see the astrology. We know what these forces mean. We know what's happening. I say we know. Let me make that more accurate. We have very high confidence in this. We've done the research. And we can see what's happening, and we can make accurate forecasts. So that's an update on what's happening with the Ukraine war, and to review our prediction and see how well it went. So if you're interested in vibrational astrology, I highly recommend the book, The Astrology of Bipolar Disorder, because it describes the scientific evidence for vibrational astrology. What we've done here is just shown an application of vibrational astrology, but the more serious, rigorous research to develop and test the models is explained in this book. And it's revolutionary, and it's leading to developments like the Academic Nonprofit Research Institute, the Cosmobiology Institute, which will be established by the end of 2022, The website is up already, but the organization is still being developed and the nonprofit process is underway. But you can visit the website to see what's happening, cosmobiology.org. So there's the book, there's the Nonprofit Research Institute, and there's the annual Vibrational Astrology Conference, which is typically on the first weekend of March in Gainesville, Florida. Very exciting. It's where the latest research is. If you're interested in what's going on and keeping up with what's happening, you can go to astrologydc.com, click on join the email list, and I will send you an email about every 2 months or so to keep you posted on new events and what's happening. So that's a good way to stay in touch. Last thing I want to mention is that the website astrosoftware.com has the software that we use for vibrational astrology. And there's an organization called the Association of Vibrational Astrologers that's being developed to support people who are interested in vibrational astrology. That's at astrovibe.org. That's it, my friends. Thank you very much for listening. God bless. Namaste.